Look at the clock. Do you know how long they sat there waiting? They counted on your tears, they counted on the long, desperate texts, and they absolutely relied on you begging them to stay. They set the stage for your humiliation, and when you didn't show up for that performance, you destroyed their reality. The moment you realized you didn't need them to define your worth was the exact moment their power evaporated. Let's talk about what happens when you refuse to play the role of the supplicant in a narcissist's twisted game. At the core of the narcissistic personality structure lies a profound, cavernous need for external validation, which is why they view your begging not as a sign of affection, but as a high-quality, refined form of narcissistic supply. To them, your desperate pleas, your tearful apologies for things you didn't do, and your frantic attempts to salvage the relationship serve as concrete evidence of their omnipotence and your subordinate status. Every time you beg, you are inadvertently feeding their fragile ego, confirming their deeply held belief that they are the prize and you are the disposable commodity. This interaction is transactional. They withhold intimacy, affection, or even basic presence, specifically to manufacture a scarcity that compels you to plead for their return. When you succumb to this trap, you are essentially paying them in the currency of your own self-respect, providing the very fuel they need to feel superior, in control, and securely attached to a position of power. They do not interpret your begging as love. They interpret it as a successful manipulation, a victory in the ongoing game of dominance. Because their internal world lacks the capacity for genuine empathetic connection, they measure the quality of their relationships through this lens of control and influence. When you beg, you are validating their false self and reinforcing the power dynamic they have meticulously constructed to keep you tethered to them. By refusing to beg, you effectively starve them of this specific, toxic sustenance, leaving them frustrated and confused. You are essentially withdrawing the validation they believe is their birthright, and in doing so, you expose the emptiness beneath their posturing. Realizing that your desperation is merely a nutrient for their disorder is often the first step toward breaking the trauma bond, as it helps you see the manipulation for what it truly is, rather than misinterpreting it as evidence of your own inadequacy. The silent treatment, or the sudden cold withdrawal, is rarely an act of actual departure. It is, in reality, a meticulously calculated psychological test designed to gauge your level of dependency. When a narcissist goes silent or creates distance, they are not seeking space for reflection. They are waiting for you to breach that silence with a frantic pursuit. This is a game of leverage. They operate under the assumption that they have conditioned you so thoroughly that your anxiety will peak the moment they withhold their attention. By stonewalling you, they force you into a position of weakness where you feel compelled to break the silence, apologize for imagined grievances, or beg for reassurance. They want to see how much of your dignity you are willing to sacrifice to bring them back to the table. This test is crucial for them because it reaffirms their status as the center of your universe. If you chase them, they know they still possess total control over your emotional landscape. They are observing your reactions with a detached, clinical eye, looking for the telltale signs of your distress. The longer they can keep you in this state of uncertainty, the more they believe they have successfully cemented their dominance over you. They do not want you to simply move on. They want you to demonstrate through your pursuit that you are incapable of functioning without their presence. Understanding this strategy is the key to neutralizing it, as it allows you to see that their silence is not a reflection of your worth, but a trap laid to lure you back into a cycle of subservience. Once you recognize this behavior for the manipulative power play that it is, the urge to chase them diminishes, and the silence becomes a space for your own reclamation rather than a vacuum they can use to exploit your insecurities. When you refuse to beg, you essentially flip the script of the entire dynamic, acting as a structural collapse for the narcissist's carefully curated reality. Their world is built upon the assumption that they are the primary architects of your emotional state and that you are perpetually waiting in the wings for their signal. By withholding the expected desperate plea, you signal that their control has reached its limit and that their influence over your internal world is no longer absolute. This creates an immediate power shift because the narcissist relies on the feedback loop of your compliance to maintain their own sense of superiority. Without the validation that comes from watching you scramble to satisfy their demands, they are left without the emotional fuel they require to feel powerful. It is not just that they lose the argument or the specific moment of conflict. They lose the narrative of their own importance in your life. When you stay calm, grounded, and silent, you effectively remove the oxygen they need to continue the game. They suddenly find themselves in a vacuum where their usual tactics of intimidation and withdrawal no longer produce the desired outcome. This shifts the weight of the situation back onto them, forcing them to confront the silence that you have created. It transforms the power dynamic from one where they dictate the terms of your worth to one where you dictate the terms of your engagement. This is the moment they realize the rules of the game have changed. And for someone who thrives on absolute control, there is nothing more terrifying than realizing they no longer have a tether to your psyche. By simply choosing not to beg, you reclaim the autonomy they spent years trying to strip away, rendering their maneuvers ineffective and forcing them to face the reality of their own irrelevance. Narcissists exist in a reality defined by cause and effect, where they provide the provocation and you provide the dramatic reaction. They are essentially emotional vampires who require your active participation in their chaos to sustain their own internal stability. When they bait you with insults, accusations, or sudden withdrawals, They are explicitly seeking a reaction, a display of tears, frantic pleading, or explosive anger, because this proves they still have the power to move you. They equate this reaction with influence. As long as they can trigger a visceral response, they know you are still under their spell. However, providing a calm, calculated response, or ideally no response at all, creates profound cognitive dissonance within them. They expect a specific performance, and when you refuse to take the stage, you shatter their script. By remaining indifferent and keeping your composure, you deny them the raw material they need to feel superior and in control. This is not just about keeping your cool. It is a tactical withdrawal of your emotional investment. When you choose to respond with clarity rather than reacting with desperation, you stop being a pawn in their game and start being an independent entity with boundaries. The narcissist cannot process this indifference because it does not fit into their worldview, where you are perpetually needy and they are perpetually the prize. Your ability to remain unbothered forces them to witness the fact that their manipulative tools have become obsolete. It is incredibly difficult to maintain this stance when your nervous system is screaming at you to react. But by anchoring yourself in silence or neutral, brief communication, you effectively starve their need for control. You transform the interaction from a power struggle they can win into a non-event where they find themselves shouting into the void, ultimately revealing their own frantic insecurity to themselves. If you are tired of the cycle of manipulation and ready to reclaim your narrative, hit that subscribe button. We are dissecting the mechanics of these toxic patterns every week so you can finally break free. When you refuse to beg, you perform an act of psychological defiance that strikes directly at the heart of the narcissist's fragile internal structure. The entire framework of their existence is built upon the projection of a false self, one that necessitates constant external validation to stay propped up against the reality of their own deep-seated insecurity. They need you to act as a mirror, reflecting back a version of them that is powerful, desirable, and untouchable. And your begging is the ultimate proof that this false self is working. By withholding that desperation, you are effectively refusing to be their mirror anymore. This creates a severe ego injury because in their mind, your refusal to beg is not a sign of your growth or your newfound self-respect. It is perceived as a profound insult and a rejection of their inherent specialness. It signals that you have detached your self-worth from their external influence, which is the most threatening thing you could ever do. They spend their entire lives trying to convince themselves that they are the center of your universe, and your lack of pleading proves that you have finally realized the truth, that you are the center of your own life. This injury is so profound because it strips away their ability to manipulate your emotions, forcing them to confront the silence you have left in your wake. They are suddenly left alone with their own shadow, without the diversion of your distress to keep them from facing their own emptiness. By not begging, you aren't just ignoring them. You are fundamentally changing the power balance, asserting that your internal validation is independent of their games. This rejection of their authority over your feelings makes you an unreachable target, leaving them to grapple with the realization that their influence over you has permanently expired. When you finally withhold the expected plea for reconciliation, you inadvertently trigger what is known as an extinction burst. In behavioral psychology, this is the sudden, temporary increase in the intensity of a behavior after the reinforcement for it has been removed. Because the narcissist has been conditioned to expect a specific outcome, your desperate groveling, the lack of that response, creates a state of acute panic. They are not used to their bait falling flat, and they will almost certainly escalate their tactics to see if they can finally break your resolve. You might suddenly find yourself the target of intense hoovering, where they shower you with fake apologies or grand promises. Or perhaps they will pivot to aggressive baiting, trying to incite a reaction through insults or by broadcasting your private business to mutual acquaintances. This is the smear campaign phase, where they attempt to reclaim control by damaging your reputation or playing the victim to force you into a defensive position. They are throwing everything they have at the wall to see what sticks, hoping that a surge of chaos will finally provoke the emotional outburst they crave. It is a desperate, frantic attempt to restore the old power balance, and it is often the most dangerous time to break contact. The narcissist is not doing this because they have suddenly realized your value. They are doing it because the loss of your compliance is a threat to their ego stability. By refusing to engage with these intensified tactics, you are successfully navigating the final, most turbulent stage of the manipulation cycle. Seeing this behavior for exactly what it is, a hollow, last-ditch effort to regain dominance, allows you to remain unmoved, watching their frantic performance from a place of safety and clarity as they exhaust themselves against the wall of your indifference. Establishing boundaries is often misunderstood as an act of aggression or coldness. But in the context of a relationship with a narcissist, it is actually the most profound act of self-preservation available to you. When you decide not to beg, you are not acting out of malice or a desire to punish the other person. You are simply erecting a protective barrier around your own psyche. For a long time, you have likely been conditioned to believe that your needs, your dignity, and your emotional stability are secondary to the narcissist's whims. Setting a boundary is the moment you reclaim those rights. It is an act of anchoring yourself in reality, acknowledging that you have a core self that is entirely separate from their fluctuating moods and manipulative demands. By refusing to chase or plead, you are effectively declaring that your peace of mind is not for sale at any price. This is not about being cold. It is about being firm in the face of chaos. You are protecting your inner landscape from being trampled by someone who views your emotions only as tools for their own gain. Every time you hold your ground, instead of reaching out to soothe their ego, you are reinforcing a boundary that says you are no longer a participant in their destructive games. This boundary becomes your armor, shielding you from the gaslighting, the shifting goalposts, and the emotional volatility that once kept you in a state of constant, exhausting hypervigilance. As you hold this line, you will find that the space inside your own life begins to feel calmer and more manageable. You aren't closing your heart to the world. You are closing the door on a specific pattern of abuse that has stolen too much of your time. This boundary setting is the foundation of your recovery, ensuring that your future self is no longer defined by the expectations of someone who was never truly capable of reciprocating your love. The most significant shift that occurs when you stop begging is a fundamental transformation of your internal status in relation to the narcissist. For the duration of your involvement, you have been categorized as a subordinate, a source of supply, and a captive audience for their projected insecurities. By ceasing the pursuit, you essentially communicate that you are no longer a participant in their hierarchy. You transition from a role of, quote, master servant, where your worth is tethered to their approval, to a position of irrelevance in their eyes. This shift is jarring for them because they require your active engagement to justify their own existence. When you stop chasing, you are no longer providing the feedback they need to sustain the delusion of their own dominance. They may initially struggle to categorize this change, viewing it as a glitch in the system that they must correct. But eventually, your persistent indifference forces them to reclassify you as someone they can no longer reach. This is the moment you reclaim your autonomy. You stop being the person who waits by the phone or analyzes their cryptic messages for meaning. Instead, you become the person who is focused on your own path, leaving them to grapple with the void you have left behind. This change is not about them losing you. It is about you finding yourself again. You realize that the entire dynamic was a performance that you had the power to end at any moment. As you move forward, the narcissist becomes little more than a background character in your life, someone whose opinion of you carries no more weight than a passing breeze. This newfound detachment is the ultimate liberation, allowing you to walk away from the toxicity and build a future that is entirely your own, unburdened by the weight of their expectations or the need to beg for a dignity that was yours all along.